Hi there, I'm the Reverend Danny Crosby, a Unitarian minister serving congregations in Altrincham and in Urmston in the northwest of England. And I offer this devotion as a balm for the heart, for the mind, for the spirit, and for the soul. And it's titled, We Are Grievers. We belong to the largest community on earth. Last Monday, I attended the funeral of a dear friend, a wonderful and deeply caring man who I've known for 20 years. Someone who I'd grown particularly close to in recent months, actually. We had many long conversations. I found the funeral and particularly the lead up to the funeral very difficult. It was a beautiful service, though, led by my ex wife, Sue, actually, and no one could have conducted the service with more appropriate sensitivity, actually. She did an incredible job. I have to say, I was utterly heartbroken during the service, and I was very grateful to be supported by a dear friend. I have noticed that when I attend a funeral rather than participate in a funeral, even ones that I participate in for my nearest and dearest, I am more affected when I'm just a congregant than when I have a duty to perform or I have other people to take care of. When I'm just released to my own feelings and my emotions, I often break down actually, but not when I'm involved. It's interesting, isn't it? It's just the way I am, I guess. On Monday, I was broken down. I'm completely broken in tears. The grief. Sometimes I've noticed grief at previous funerals have been not just for the person who has died, but for other people. On Monday, the grief was purely for my friend. Grief is a complicated and a deeply affecting emotion. It's not something that you transcend, even with time. But it is something, or the love within the grief is something that can lead to transformation in life. Grief can feel very lonely, and certainly it's always deeply personal. And yet, it is the most universal emotion that we experience, something that will affect every one of us. And the reason for this is that grief is actually about love and the loss of love. So, all who love will grieve. It's all about love. All of us belong to the largest community on God's sweet earth, the community of grievers. And grief is the price that we pay for love. But it's a price worth paying. For what is life without love? Life is nothing, it is meaningless, an empty vessel. So the only way to escape grief is to totally armor your heart and therefore deny any love. And who would want to live like that? Who would want to live without love? Who would want to live the life of a zombie or a scarecrow who merely observes life, detached from life? Certainly not I. I live engrossed, connected, a part of life. No detachment for me, thank you very much. So I should be affected by life and therefore become effective in life. We all belong to the largest community on earth, the community of grievers. Now, while it's the largest community on earth, it is one that most of us probably don't want to be a part of. I'm sure that this has always been the case, but it seems even more clear today. We kind of live, even post COVID to a degree, we live in kind of death denying times. We live where we're told we're supposed to be able to rise above our problems, rise above our troubles, rise above our struggles. Even much modern day so called spirituality suggests that we can transcend all these troubles, that we can rise above anything if we just desire it, if we just manifest it enough. But grief and death and love are not something you need to rise above. They bring us down to size, actually. They, they show us otherwise that is not the case. You don't rise above grief. Grief is something that levels you, actually, that brings you down to your human, finite self. It humbles in the truest sense of the word. And I suspect that this is why acceptance is considered the last stage of grief, because somewhere in all of us is this false belief that it can't really bring us down to human size, that we can somehow transcend and rise above these human feelings that connect us to one another and to the core of life. So grief changes you, although it's not really the loss that does this, but the love. It's the love that changes you that's at the core of grief. And what hurts so much about grief is the loss, the very physical loss of those that we care about. There is no consolation for this, and we don't simply get over it. The pain of such loss, though, becomes a part of us. The ghosts are part of us, just as the love we share becomes a part of us. What actually happens in time is that our life enlarges once again, and we're not as dominated by the intense feelings as much as we were before. But even then, from time to time, grief will still overwhelm us. And it can happen decades, years and decades later. For that is love and loss. Love and loss is meant to overwhelm us. Life is meant to overwhelm us sometimes. We're not gods. We're fish that swim in the sea. We're not the sea itself. And there's no time limit to any of this. Stephanie Erickson says in the book Companion Through Darkness, grief is a tidal wave that overtakes you, smashes you up into its darkness, where you tumble and crash against unidentifiable surfaces, only to be thrown out on an unknown beach, bruised and reshaped. It's a feeling I've felt these last few days, these last few weeks actually. Bruised and reshaped, like salmon swimming in the sea. When we lose someone we love or deeply care about, it changes us forever. We lose a part of ourselves. Yes, a part of them may remain with us, but a part of us is gone with them. Life will never be quite the same again. We don't rise above the pain of grief. We cannot pretend that it's not there. We don't simply get over it like the flu. What happens is that we are changed by it, and as a result, our hearts are enlarged by it, and we grow as human beings. If the love has been truly realized, it allows us to grow, but not rise above. You see, grief is about transformation. It's not about transcendence. By the way, I believe that's the true purpose of spiritual living. Grief is not an attempt to explain the loss or even understand some meaning locked into what has happened. Instead, it seems to me that grief is more about finding meaning in the absence of an explanation. Through our living, meaning may emerge once again. Grief truly is the price that we pay for love, but then what else is there worth dying for other than love? Surely we all want to live in such a way that our lives will prove worth dying for by the love that we leave behind. To paraphrase good old Forrest Church, who probably wrote, I don't think anyone's wrote better on grief, on love and loss. Grief does not always appear as tears, by the way. It affects people in different ways. Grief can make us cry uncontrollably, and it can make us go numb. I've experienced both. At the funerals of those I've loved dearly, I've wept, and I've gone numb. Who knows why? Grief can make us feel guilty or depressed or fearful, or it can make us angry. Grief can cause emotional problems. It can cause our heart problems, physical trouble. We can have a broken heart, actually. Our grieving hearts. It affects our bodies. It's such a weight to carry. It can bring on a state of utter disbelief. It can make us withdraw. It can make us feel like we're going completely crazy. In other words, no matter what the textbook tells us, the stage of grief do not offer a direct, like a mathematical route, if you like. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model from her 1969 book suggests that the passage might be denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But it's often forgotten that Kubler-Ross also said that her list is not comprehensive and her list does not happen in order. It goes round and round and all over the place, actually. It's not some perfect linear line that you work through and come to a final place at the end of your journey. Life's just not like that. Love's just not like that. And grief is not like that. You just go round and round. And I think actually she's captured rather beautifully, almost perfectly, in the following poem by Linda Paston, The 5 Stages of Grief by Linda Paston. The night I lost you, someone pointed me towards the 5 stages of grief. Go that way, they said. It's easy, like learning to climb stairs after the amputation. And so I climbed. Denial was first. I sat down at breakfast, carefully setting the table for 2. I passed you the toast. You sat there. I passed you the paper. You hid behind it. Anger seemed more familiar. I burned the toast, snatched the paper, and read the headlines myself. But they mentioned your departure, and so I moved on to bargaining. What could I exchange for you? The silence after storms? My typing fingers? Before I could decide, depression came puffing up. A poor relation, its suitcase tied together with string. In the suitcase were bandages for the eyes and bottles of sleep. I slid all the way down the stairs, feeling nothing, and all the time hope flashed on and off in deflective neon. Hope was a signpost pointing straight in the air. Hope was my uncle's middle name. He died of it. After a year, I'm still climbing, though my feet slip on your stone face. The tree line has long since disappeared. Green is a colour I have forgotten, but now I see what I am climbing towards. Acceptance. Written in capital letters, a special headline. Acceptance. Its name is in the lights. I struggle on, waving and shouting. Below, my whole life spreads its turf, its surf, all the landscapes I've ever known or dreamed of. Below, a fish jumps, the pulse in your neck. Acceptance. I finally reach it. But something is wrong. Grief is a circular staircase. I have lost you. Just doesn't, it's not some simple pattern that we just pass through, like going on holiday or going from one destination to another. It just doesn't work like that. It's a circular circuit. It's not even circular, it goes all over the place. Grief is deeply personal. It does not follow a pattern. It can rise up and return at any moment. It's amazing what memories can come back as we grieve. Memories of past grief, actually. I went for a lovely summer walk on Monday evening with a dear, dear friend who has known much and deep grief in her life. We talked and we shared about many past losses and many people that we have loved and lost and the complex feelings that accompany such loss. As I returned home that evening, I witnessed the shocking news of the horrific murder and knife attack of innocent children in that dance school in Southport. Brutal murder of innocence. I watched the communal grief and the horrific, the way that some people have responded to it in horrific, just intensifying the grief instead of allowing the grieving communities to grieve as they would see fit. How people take advantage of such things. Shocking murder. Took me back actually to the murder of Joe Cox in my hometown and the communal grief of that community. At the time it came together. I also have, as we all do, feel the pain of those suffering in Israel and Palestine, as well as other parts of the world where innocent people are caught up in conflict, murdered by all kinds. Such violence is inhuman and utterly dehumanizing, and at times it is dehumanizing. It can be unbearable to bear such witness at times, especially if you are grieving too. I've heard so many people this week, people who are actually grieving in their own ways, in different ways, not being able to, just turning away, too much for them, overwhelmed by other grief because they're suffering themselves. Guilt and anger are two powerful emotions that accompany grief. Depression is another one, actually. I have felt some guilt, depression, and anger in recent weeks. Something that's been very difficult to talk about as I have had to hold certain things very close to my heart. I was able to talk a little about this on Monday evening, and it did lighten the intensity to some degree. Sharing our grief, whether personal or communal, actually, is so vital. It can become transformative, and it certainly is connective. It can lead to change in our lives. As I talked about the empathy and the deepening compassion that can grow from this guilt, actually, that can grow from these feelings. I talked about this last week, how these feelings can breed empathy and compassion. They can spur us on to do better things when we perhaps have fallen short or felt these feelings. It can lead to deeper and more purposeful living. As I've often said, it was grief that led me into ministry, and 14 years I celebrated on Thursday since the 1st of August 2010 when I began my ministry with the wonderful people of Altrincham and Urmston. We have loved and we have grieved, and we have celebrated and we've experienced joy together. What an incredible blessing. But all that grew from something that came from personal loss and personal grief, trying to make sense, which I haven't done. But grief does lead to depressive and episodes that can lead to living better lives eventually. And it's the empathy and the compassion and the love that does this. It reminds me of an event that I read about in the life of the great 20th century Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. Buber placed great emphasis on the importance of establishing deep, intimate encounters between people, I-thou, rather than I-it relationships. Buber often spoke of a tragic incident that shaped his life while he was still in his 20s. He was at home working on a scholarly manuscript when there was a knock on the door. The visitor at the door seemed somewhat distraught, and Buber, sympathetic to the man, but anxious to return to his work, answered the man's questions briefly, but as Buber later expressed it, I did not answer the question that he did not ask. Buber subsequently learned that just a few days after their brief encounter, the man died, an apparent suicide. From then on, Buber concluded encounters with people must take precedence, even over scholarship and mystical speculation. So things can be learnt, we can improve as people, following love and loss and grief. But I'm not suggesting that there is a blessing in the pain of grief. I'm not saying that itself. I hope I am never so crass as to suggest to a person that there is meaning in the loss, in the actual loss of someone that they loved. Now, what I am suggesting is that meaning can grow from the love that is at the heart of grief. If we live faithfully, and my ministry's testimony to this, it is love that changes us actually, not the loss itself, but the love at the core of the loss. It's the love itself. There is no blessing in grief and loss. It just hurts and it's just heavy. and it feels like a curse, and it actually can destroy. I've seen people crippled, literally crippled, like bent and contorted over when in the pain of grief. That said, if we can find the support, both visible support from journeying with people and invisible from spiritual support from God as we understand God, if we can find this support to hold us and sustain us, we can be transformed by our grief, and it can help us in the future to be there when others suffer too. But that's not an overnight job. It grows slowly, very slowly, as we slowly come back to life once again. If I've learned anything, I have learned that this return to life from grief, from loss, begins as we accompany others. I felt it once again on Monday evening as I walked with a friend, as I was accompanied, as we have shared many times, side by side. It's something I've done with others maybe all my life. To me, the essence of the religious life, the spiritual life, is about accompanying and being a companion. It's about walking together, sharing together, side by side. Grief can feel so lonely, yet the truth is that it is the most universal feeling that any of us will ever know. We, all of us, we belong to the largest community on God's sweet earth, the community of grievers. May we remember to accompany one another on this journey through love and loss and return to love again. Amen. So I'm going to end with some final words of blessing. You know, we need to bless more, and we can all bless. We bless when we give ourselves wholeheartedly to life. So let's return to life in peace. Let's deeply regard one another. Listen to each other. Speak what each of us must speak, and be ready in any moment to disarm our own hearts. May we always live as if the realm of love had already begun. And may the blessings of God go with us all, and may it do so in all that we feel, in all that we think, in all that we say, in all that we do. When love, go in peace. Amen.